Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gabe's here. This is the tank guide for Normal and Heroic Oregorger. And believe it or not, this is a very easy fight to tank. There's really only one basic mechanic you have to think about in terms of tank swaps or damage reduction. And otherwise, it's just a matter of dealing with the roll phase along with the rest of the raid team. However, as a tank, you have much higher survivability in that phase, so even if you screw it up, it's not a huge issue. So the only primary mechanic you have to think about as a tank is Acid Torrent, and this occurs fairly frequently. The basic way it works is that it will cast a projectile of acid toward a random ranged raid member. So your raid group, your ranged players, will all be stacked up behind you. So you can see in my view here, I'm in the ranged group, and ahead of me is the tanks, of course, in front of the boss. So the tanks will place themselves between the ranged group and the boss. And it's important that the current tank, the boss that's actually, or the tank that's got threat on the boss, is really close to the boss in front of the other tank. What this does is this forces the projectile of Acid Torrent to initially hit that front tank. And the initial hit is going to do significant damage to that person only. Therefore, if you're tanking the boss at the time and Acid Torrent is cast, make sure you use a personal mitigation ability, cooldown, anything like that. The more damage you can reduce on the initial hit, the less damage the remaining shards from the projectile will do to the rest of the raid behind you. So this is the primary mechanic of the fight. It's also the tank swap mechanic as well. You'll want to swap every 2 stacks of this debuff. So you step forward when it's your turn to tank. Use a cooldown for the first and second Acid Torrent, which will hit you primarily, and then splash to everyone behind you for lesser damage. And then the tank partner will taunt, take over. You step back behind that person, and they step in front of you, and they do the same thing. And this process repeats back and forth throughout the entire standard phase of the fight. The other thing you may be tasked with in the standard phase for tanking is Blackrock Barrage interrupts. So this mechanic essentially requires 3 different sources of interrupt about every 20-25 seconds or so. So the way that our raid chose to handle it was to have 3 pairs of 2 players each, so that each of the pairs could get the first, second, and third interrupt respectively. And that way, if someone in the pair messed up, the other person could handle the backup. So tanks generally are not assigned to do this, but if you are in range, you can obviously help out with this. The basic idea is when the boss gains his Blackrock Spines buff, it's a 3-stack buff, and when this is active, he can then cast the Blackrock Barrage at any time. Each time he casts it, whether he's interrupted or not, he will lose a stack of the buff until he's cast it 3 times and the buff is gone. And then from there, he has a cooldown period before he gets a new stack, or 3-stack rather, and he can recast those 3. So just watch for those casts if you're assigned to interrupt, and make sure you interrupt on your particular cast. Since it casts in rapid succession often, you cannot get more than 1 out of the set of 3 usually. The final overall mechanic is the entire roll phase. And the basic idea here is that Oregorger, when he reaches 0 energy or mana, will start to roll around the room trying to eat up ore that is dropped from killing the boxes or crates around the room. And if he runs through a player during this period, he will do significant damage to them. He also does raid-wide damage every time he hits a wall and stops. So this damage increases over time, so there's roughly a softened rage. That means you can't last forever in this phase. That said, like I mentioned before, as a tank, even getting hit by the roll itself does not kill you outright, as long as you get healed at some point, essentially. Whereas other players will usually die if they get hit by it and they're too low. So if you want the full details of how this phase works, animation, explanation of the stop points, his paths, all that good stuff, highly encourage you to check out the Normal and Heroic Raid Guide. It's the green link at the bottom left there, and that'll explain everything. But otherwise, just do your best as a tank to watch where he's looking and know that he will charge in that direction next. And so you want to try to stay out of his pathway while keeping next to the healers or killing the crates yourself, since you can obviously do that along with DPS. Once the phase ends, he will be at whatever stop point he ended at, and then it's depending on your raid strategy to decide whether you need to move him or you just keep him where he is. Usually you'll probably just keep him where he stands at the end. So that covers it really. It's a very basic fight to tank, as I mentioned. Most of the mechanics are handled by other raid members, ranged DPS healers or melee DPS even. So it's mostly up to you as a tank to handle the acid torrent properly, your tank swaps, your positioning when you have to go off, and of course your own personal cooldowns when you're soaking that hit. So, as always, good luck, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh my god, like, you would totally be my best friend and stuff if you clicked on the subscribe button or whatever. Oh, that would be just so super.